So you just, like, maybe, yeah, perfect.
Is that good?
Yep, and look at me. So then, just first to tell you who you are.
Sure, I'm Tom Uldrick. I'm a clinical researcher at the National Cancer Institute.
And what is your experience with Castleman's, or how did you get introduced to the disease?
So I got introduced to treating patients with KSHV or HHV-8-associated Castleman's disease about 6 years ago when I started working at the National Cancer Institute. We have a cohort of about 45 patients that we follow with that disease, and we've been exploring various immune therapies and antiviral therapies for KSHV-associated Castleman's disease.
Interesting. So what was then your first exposure to the CDCN?
So CDCN I first became aware of directly through David, who contacted me shortly after he was first treated for Castleman's disease to learn more about what the National Cancer Institute was doing in this area and to look at parallels between KSHV, or the virally associated Castleman's disease, and what we now call idiopathic Castleman's disease.
And what are some of the things going on right now in the development of new research or exciting things happening around Castleman?
For CDCN for
well, just Castleman disease in general, either idiopathic or multicentric.
Right. So I think, speaking from the KSHV-associated Castleman's disease, we've learned a lot about what you can do to treat in terms of treating specific viral proteins such as phosphotransferases, which are upregulated in some of the lytic cells that are infected with KSHV and are thought to drive Castleman's disease. We've learned where that works and where there are limits. We've learned how to treat with immunotherapies such as rituximab, and we've learned where they work and how well it works and where there's limits. And we're learning, I think, to treat patients with Castleman's disease quite effectively when it's KSHV associated at least, and improve the survival of this patient population dramatically over a very short period of time. Historically, about a decade ago, patients with KSHV associated Castleman's died within 6 months, and now 80 to 90% of them live long term. And a good portion of those patients are in long-term remissions after initial therapy, and I think that's one of the biggest advances I've seen in cancer therapy in a long time.
Wow.
Moving forward with idiopathic Castleman's disease, we've seen a lot of progress with anti-IL-6 therapies, but I do think that idiopathic Castleman's disease is a little bit more diverse in terms of the pathophysiology, and understanding that better is something that's one of the major goals of the CDCN, and I think that the work to try to understand that by bringing together patients with that disease is fantastic, and will really change the way we look at this a decade from now.
Awesome. Tell me a little more then about how you feel CARE and CDCN are going to impact that going forward and their importance. And
so I think a couple of the major things that you need to do to understand the disease is, one, to put people in the right categories. And I think for idiopathic Castleman's disease, there's probably one or two categories that patients are going to fit in. And so one of the first things we have to do is develop criteria to recognize the disease and put the patients in the right category of disease, and that will depend on pathologists and clinicians coming together with good criteria. Additionally, the CDCN has put together a working diagnosis so that we can recognize this in databases. Right now, we currently have no idea how many patients in the United States have Castleman's disease, and we put forward, David and Fritz have gone in front of the CDC to put together a code so that this will be coded correctly, and we will now know how many patients are being diagnosed with this nationwide. So I think there's concurrent projects to really identify the size of the problem, and people who have that problem, put them in the right box. And once we understand clinically who those patients are, I think it will be much easier to start to understand what the abnormalities that we need to treat are.
yeah. So what would you say to patients out there that can see this video, and what can they do going forward?
I mean, I think the important things are to educate yourself about Castleman's disease, to learn about the various treatment options, to understand that the treatments for Castleman's disease are in their infancy right now. And certainly anti-IL-6 therapies are very important and a huge step forward, but it's probably not the only treatment that we'll need for this disease. And participating in the registry, for example, will be very important so that we can understand the variety of disease that we're currently calling Castleman's disease.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Is that okay?
Yeah, it's great.
Good.
Thank you for doing that.